So part of my solution to all these things is, let's stop growing that dysfunctional place. We've got to behave responsibly and make sure that people are taken care of. But let's over the long term, let's start devolving power back to where government's supposed to be, close to the government, where it's more accountable, where it's more effective, where it's more efficient. That's the local government, that's the state government. That really is kind of our foundational premise. So that would be my long-term solution. Short-term, we got to act responsibly. Sir.
Okay, Bob Gifford from Treasurer, Wisconsin Green Party. So I'm not your opposition. I have a question I'd like to preface with some stats.
Okay.
Business person.
And I'm an accountant. I like numbers.
From Federal Reserve Econometrics. You know the classic downtrend in the labor force participation rate,
right,
like this.
Yep.
We're now at 92 million people not in the workforce, eligible age, not disabled. They could be in it, they're not. So these are not going away. I believe going to technological changes, robotics, artificial intelligence, and the general degrading of skills. Labor force is being displaced faster than it can be replaced. New skills. So businesses essentially are no longer job creators. And this is a perception. It's out there. Perception is everything in politics. Right? So, here's my question.
Okay.
Are you going to stick with the comment that single working class mothers should find a man to support them so that they're not married to the government? Or is that kind of just a thing you're kind of throwing a zinger at your Tea Party folks to get them to back you up?
First of all, I never said that. That's not a quote. That's a mischaracterization of what I've been talking about in my PowerPoint presentations. Where that comes from, I'm happy to discuss it here. Where it comes from, after I lay out all the, unfortunately for you, don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm not going to utterly depress you with the fiscal situation in this country. And I just talk about the last two things. I talk a little bit about the cost of college, how it has grown way above the rate of inflation. And then the last thing I talk about is poverty. And I always start out talking about how this is a very compassionate society. And we have instituted all kinds of programs because as a compassionate society, we want to help people who can't help themselves. We want to help people that help themselves. And then what I do is I show a graph that lays out when we really started tracking poverty rates in the late 50s. We didn't really keep those statistics, but we started doing it. From the late 50s to about the mid 60s, number of people in poverty and poverty rates were declining dramatically. We had a burgeoning economy after World War II. Now, the poverty rates were still too high. It was, over 15%. A couple of years later, it was about 15%. And number of people in poverty, I think off the top of my head, is about 29 million. And then what I show is, because we're a compassionate society and those poverty rates, the number of people in poverty was still too high. And we had for example, the boob tubes, we saw images of abject poverty being beamed into our living rooms from Appalachian places. And so as a compassionate society, we weren't going to stand for that. So we passed the Great Society programs, the War on Poverty. And I put a stark, dark black line, that line of demarcation. And then I just asked, did that work? $16 trillion is what we spent. And I just lay out the facts. Since that time, we've gone from about 29 million people in poverty to about 47 million people in poverty. 47 million people on food stamps. So again, I realize our population's grown. So the next point I make is that's not the best metric. Probably poverty rates are better. And the fact is shortly after a couple of years after we started spending money, kind of a slow start up in the war on poverty rates about 15%. Guess where poverty rates are today? 15%. I mean, it's gone up and down based on economic conditions, but basically poverty's flatlined. So it's been coming down like this, pretty well flatlined, trend line. So any objective observer would unfortunately have to conclude, as well-intentioned as compassion as the war on poverty was, it didn't work. We really haven't put a dent in poverty. Then I look at one other societal metric, something that I wasn't the first person to raise it. The first person I ever heard talk about the danger of increasing out-of-wedlock birth rates was Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He was a Democrat senator from, well, back then he was a social scientist. By the way, he paid a pretty heavy price professionally for even raising the issue, just telling the truth. But in the mid-'60s, he was starting to write how out-of-wedlock birth rates had gone from 4% to 8%. He was alarmed by that. That's kind of a dangerous thing. That's not a metric of success. If you look at a family as sort of the foundational building block of a successful society. So I view that as an important societal metric. And the sad fact is that was about 8% in the mid-'60s when we engaged in the war on poverty. Do you know what it is today? Now it's over 40%. Again, this is no value judgment. I always add, when I talk about single moms raising kids, we know them doing a great job, but they struggle. It's hard. And the sad fact is, if you are a single mom trying to raise a family, 41% of single moms trying to raise families are in poverty. So this whole discussion is about poverty, and I'm just asking the question, could all of our well-intentioned programs had a very serious negative unintended consequence of incentivizing that growth from 8% to 41%? I'm just asking that question. I never, ever said what these blogs have been quoting me as saying. I talk about it from that standpoint. I'm just asking people to look at facts and figures and ask themselves hard questions. I mean, I'm a manufacturer. I've solved a lot of problems. You've got to go root cause analysis. And unless we're willing to ask ourselves those hard questions, unless we're willing to face some pretty hard and unpleasant truths, whether it's Islamic terrorists growing, whether it's a deficit, according to CBO, over the next 30 years of $127 trillion cumulative deficit over the next 30 years. You know, if we're not willing to ask ourselves those questions, we're not willing to look at that stuff honestly, we have no hope of solving some of these problems. So no, I never ever said that. That is not what
Can I postscript it?
Sure.
1 minute? Okay. Because the Green Party is getting younger, poorer, and more female, more urban as well. But not only urban. So I've been getting these emails and reading these Facebook comments from younger women, right? And they, I think, would appreciate if you would work overtime and clarify that, because a lot of people are saying not very complimentary things about their senator.
It's a very nasty business.
And they're, right now, they are not a high voting base people, but that is going to change, you know. And so you folks need to be aware of that the most important group you could be speaking to are the millennial generation and the generation zero that were born in 2000. You have to learn to converse with them and not say things that set people off.
I didn't say that.
Right.
I mean, so again,
well,
there's a reason people avoid this process like a plague. There's a reason when after I gave a little speech and told the story about my daughter, and people came up to me and say, "Hey, I liked your speech. Why don't you run?" You know, my first response was, "Because I'm not crazy." I mean, who would want to subject themselves to this process? But you know, then after a few months, I thought about that. They passed Obamacare, and we can talk about that. You know, I started seeing us running a $1.4 trillion deficit in just a single year. And so I decided to subject myself and my family to this process. It's not pleasant. It's not fun. You know, I don't like when people tell lies or don't tell the truth. And, you know, but one of the reasons I'm here at, you know, starting out, you know, yesterday about 3:30 in the morning Central Time, flying to D.C. Didn't get home till 10:30 last night. Now about 10 o'clock. And I'll get home a little bit earlier tonight, starting about 7 o'clock, and I'll get home about 9:30, talking to groups like this. And that's why I say appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the question. But I'm just trying to convey that. I'm the messenger. I'm hoping Wisconsin will appreciate the fact that you got somebody out there willing to tell the truth. Again, from my perspective, I'm not saying I'm the font of all wisdom. Everything I say is right. But at least I'm willing to be as honest as possible. And that's what I'm trying to do. Ma'am.
Senator Johnson, I'm very concerned about security. And I want to know what you now as the new chair can do with Jay Johnson about the Americans who are going to fight against us to be trained and how we can control their conduct.
Right. and we will. There are a number of things that have to be done. We have to secure the border. Okay, and there are all kinds of different things you have to do to secure the border. I mean, interior enforcement, there's fencing, there's roads, there's electronic surveillance equipment, there's an exit entry system, which was mandated should be an operational biometric system. I think in this 1996, and then reauthorized again in 2000. We still haven't done it. We were supposed to build like 700 miles of fencing. We haven't done it. Okay, so I mean, we need to do it finally, but we need to do so much more. I know that the NSA data collection program created a great uproar after Edward Snowden, who was a traitor, revealed that. Anybody kind of happy? Anybody a little bit relieved that now we have these terrorists in Paris, that we actually do have the capability, and you're seeing Europe employ their capabilities right now, that the people they were talking to over the phone, making those connections, that intelligence gathering, that some of that surveillance, now they can find that there was a little bit wider web. We don't know how wide, we don't know how extensive. From my standpoint, I sure hope we still have the capability that if those terrorists that perpetrated that Paris attack were calling people in the United States, maybe sleeper cells, we might have a chance of getting that information. So I believe I heard the president say this is not the time to end that NSA program. Now, it is time to make sure that we have robust ongoing monitoring, robust congressional oversight to make sure that no Americans' rights are infringed or that Americans are harmed by that process. But boy, if we're going to keep ourselves safe against a growing threat, and again, we always have that trade-off, that delicate balance between civil liberties, freedom, and security. Just take a look at the highway out here. You are infringing my freedom by putting a speed limit out there. But I'm glad we do. I wouldn't want a bunch of people driving 100 miles an hour because I'm trying to get on okay, that's infringement on our freedom, but it's done to keep us safe and secure. And so we've always got to realize that fulcrum, that balance point is going to shift back and forth. And here's another thing that we must do. President Obama has stated the goal with ISIS. A little late, and we can talk about some of the blunders, but let's take a look at right now. ISIS has risen from the ashes of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. We don't know the exact number, but it's literally tens of thousands of foreign fighters, jihadists, terrorists, evil barbarians is what I'd call them. You just have to read about what they're doing in terms of forcing little children to behead people, desensitizing them. It's just grotesque. President Obama laid out the goal for America is degrade and ultimately defeat or destroy ISIS. What does he mean by that? I really don't know. Right now he's really does not have a strategy for defeat. We're barely containing. I'm not sure we are containing. So from my standpoint, I think it's imperative that we actually do accomplish that goal of defeat, whatever that means. You're not going to wipe them out to the last man standing. But we have to dramatically point out to the world that ISIS is a losing organization, that is a losing proposition. Don't even think of going to Syria and Iraq because you will lose. Because as long as ISIS and Al-Qaeda isn't losing, they're going to be perceived as winning. As long as they're perceived as winning, they're going to continue to be able to successfully use social media like they did, hacking into Central Command to inspire the type of action we saw in Paris, like we saw in Ottawa, in Sydney, Fort Hood, Texas, the streets of New York. Okay? So to me, border security, a robust intelligence gathering capability, combined with a robust monitoring and congressional oversight of that intelligence gathering capability, and then we have got to take the fight to them. We just do. Or we're going to be fighting them on the streets of America, which I don't want to do. So, to me, those are the three things. I've got control over cybersecurity on my committee and border security, and those are top priorities of the committee. Sir?
Senator, I want to bring up the issue of immigration